Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Punaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavati Tamastu Mavitvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hey everyone. So we left off last week on chapter, just approaching verse 9, chapter 9, verse 22. So we, from 20 to 28, we're pursuing the topic, which is one attains what one strives for. So very important to remember, whatever you strive for, that's what's going to happen, not what you would like to happen. So if you don't strive also, that's what's going to happen. And in the previous verse, he was talking about having enjoyed, remember the punya, having enjoyed the worlds of heaven, you exhaust your heaven and you go back to that mundane value. So even if you're putting in good actions, meritorious deeds, you'll get the heaven, but it's temporary. So we really want to be concentrating ourselves on not just unselfish actions, but selfless actions, and our determination of that is when our thoughts are focused on the truth. And then we pursue what is obligatory. So if you pursue the world, you'll get the world. If you pursue the self, you get the self. If you pursue something unselfish, you'll get a heavenly merit. But remember, it's temporary. So, verse 22. Is there any question before we go ahead? Okay. Let's have verse 22.
Ananyashchintayanto mam ye janah paryupasate tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham.
So, Babita, if you could read the verse.
Verse 22. To those persons who worship me, thinking of nothing else, to those ever seeking union, I grant them yoga, union, and kshema, supreme bliss.
Okay. So for those persons who worship me, get yoga and kshema. And this is a very famous verse. It's not the central verse, but it's the geometrical central verse. It's considered as the central verse, an important verse. It's like a formula which is promising, which nobody can really promise because you have to put in your own efforts. But it's like putting forward, if you do this, this is what will happen, as the topic suggests, you gain what you pursue. So the formula is for your material and equally your spiritual and material pursuits. So if you worship me. Me is always in reference to the self, with no other thinking. Ananya chinta. Ananya, no. Chinta, no other thought. With a firm goal. So your question has got to be to yourself, what are you actually working for? Is it just to work for a living, to get your bills paid? Or is it something more? As a human being, you've got to raise yourself and put in your effort. It doesn't matter where you are, whether you're young or old, as a matter of physical being. You've got to be working for something bigger if you want to be spiritually evolving. Nobody is exempt. You know, I hear sometimes people say, well, now I'm retired and I've done my work. No, you don't escape it. You've retired that paying for your bills, etc. But you've not paid for your bills within your karma of your vasanas. So if you don't want to carry that misery forward, get working on it, which means service. We all do service in different ways. It's not just, you know, there's many ways, many levels you can serve. So the worst thing of why people become lonely is because they're not prepared to break out of their own cocoons and serve. That if you don't serve, expect to be individualistic, expect to be isolated. So that's the cause of your own. So what are you working for? It's got to be beyond your own interest. So he's putting forward yoga and kshema, which means you've got to fix a goal beyond your own interest, if it's for yoga. And even kshema, if it's for the material or the spiritual. So put in all the efforts to that goal and never deviate. This is tapas, physically channelizing your goal to a higher purpose. Don't let anything disturb you or distract you from that. It's a self-control, a self-discipline. Focus on something bigger. Channelize all your efforts there. Don't get caught with the past or the future. Just focus on what you've got to do with the goal in mind. Because that's not, it prevents that indulgence. That's a spiritual value beyond your own self-interest when you're going inward. So I give you kshema, he's saying. So yoga is that union with yourself. Kshema is preserving what you've already gained materially. You know, the pseudo idea of if you're spiritual, you have to give up all your material things, or you shouldn't have material things, as far as not true. It's like bogus. So whatever you have, it gets preserved, and whatever you aspire for, if it's in terms of the self, that will get fulfilled. So he's promising two things, yoga and kshema. So the more you go inwards, the more stability you gain. You in union with your true self, you're uniting. That idea is there in your mind. So it's subtle when you turn inwards. And you won't be satisfied till you reach that truth. So you got to establish yourself, not in the finite, but the infinite. Very tricky because we don't really know what it is. But once you start going inward, a little bird tells you, and your conscience helps, that little voice, to take you in the right direction, to make the distinction between what is permanent, impermanent, what is a bigger value, what is a non-essential value. So the Atman is all infinite, powerful, blissful. So one's got to keep going on that yoga. And even when you're on that route, it becomes like a vacuum, and you won't rest content till you get there. It's like you're under pressure, and you're releasing that pressure in a positive way. It's not a pressure which is hankering you down in the worldly things, pushing you to the next desire. So you keep going till realization. So one needs to make a start by focusing on one's own thoughts. That takes Shraddha. Remember what this word Shraddha is. What's this word Shraddha mean? Anybody?
The faith.
Faith, but a little bit more than faith. What's faith?
Faith that you know that even if you have not seen something, that will happen.
Happen. On what basis? How do we have that faith or enable it?
That's what the Shraddha is.
You're taking the question here. What's faith? Shraddha. What's Shraddha? Faith. A little bit more. Good. Start.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have a confidence in something unknown, some supreme power that will happen.
Okay. So on what basis do you have that confidence? Ash.
Is it based on you've heard or you've seen? That is that knowing. So there's some experience, there's some I think it's heard, seen, and
It's different.
experience maybe.
Okay. If you've experienced, you don't need to have the faith, you've got that. But yeah, along the route. Anybody else add to that? So why we're asking this question, one thing in the spiritual path is avoid blind faith. Just believing in something for the sake of it. So what does that mean if we're avoiding blind faith? What does it mean? Does it mean we shouldn't have faith? No. So what does it mean?
I think you have an instinct, that some sixth sense.
Okay.
Is it when you're following blind faith, you're not using your intellect, your own body?
Okay.
I think so a bit like what Ash said, like when you experience something, so if you're consistent with your purpose and yeah.
So anybody else? Complete.
Is it inquiry?
Inquiry. You've got to be doing that, using your intellect. Inquiry. Inquiring to what?
What's it all about?
Okay. So Shraddha, consistency of purpose. You don't know the goal, but you fix an ideal, a goal, even if it's unknown. You know what you're after. You've made a hypothesis. You've gathered all the facts, and then you project that goal, and you work towards it with a consistency of purpose. So you've got the possibilities, the facts, you've got the comparisons, you've got the knowledge. You just don't know. It's like going to a destination you've never been to, but you get the map, you get the directions. En route, you go consistently, you drive, you look at all the signposts, and you get there. When you're going to a new country, you don't know what that country is, but you get on the plane, you've bought your ticket, you don't know that route in between. You've never been in the skies as such direction. You don't suddenly say in the sky, hey, I saw that cloud last time. But you've collected enough information that's going to put you in that destination. And when you reach there, you go, oh, this is where I live. I'm in Australia now. So it's a consistency of purpose, of a goal, which maybe you don't know, but you have gathered the facts systematically. And when you get there, you come to know what it is. So you have a goal, you have that shraddha, a belief that you can get there, but it's not blind. You have pratiksha. Along the way, there's going to be a lot of inconveniences, but you put up with them with pleasure. And gradually, it allows you to become established within your goal of yoga, union with the self. So it's difficult to focus on this ultimate goal. So we may make our goals smaller, limited in self-evolution so that we can get there. But ultimately, we have idols to reach the ideal. We have goals to reach the ultimate. So he promises the preservation of whatever the material that you require and yoga, union with the self. Really, the promise is only because you put in the effort. Yoga, but that's the beauty of it. Put in the effort, you get both. Yoga and Shiva. Let's read the verse. Ash, you have a question?
Yeah, can I? It's probably just my confusion, but so what he's saying here is strive for a goal, and I will deliver. In earlier verses, he said, just put the effort in, don't look at the goal at all.
Okay.
Is that right? So
Yes.
is this contradictory to what he said earlier, or not contradictory, but is this like...
Seems like a paradox, seems contradictory. No, you see, if you remember in Karma Yoga and all the way through, the thing to remember is you must pitch up a goal. The goal in Karma Yoga, Bhakti, Jnana, it's got to be beyond your own self-interest, number one. Once you've pitched up that goal, your mind's surrendered to that ideal. So your mind's kept quiet and calm because it's focused on something bigger. But you act in the present action with that goal in mind. If you don't have a goal, your mind will wander everywhere. So it's anchoring your mind in that. And you've got a direction then to build momentum. Without the goal, your mind gets dissipated. It's difficult to keep tapas or channelize that energy.
Okay. The preceding verse covers spiritual seekers with unselfish goals. Those seekers follow the scriptural injunctions and confer to spiritual practices to gain their limited goals for promoting the welfare of their society. Consequently, they acquire punya, the benefit of their meritorious deeds. This verse describes the seekers of the ultimate reality, Brahman. Those who pursue and merge with the Supreme Self. Krishna uses the pronoun me to mean the self in all beings. He supports and promises the state of spiritual enlightenment to those who seek the self. This verse is virtually the geometric center of the Bhagavad Gita, reputed as one of the celebrated verses where God promises human beings the final merger with his immortal being.
So just note, the previous verse was talking about punya. Here he's talking about one on the pursuit of realization. Yogakshema gains that enlightenment. Let's go.
The Lord's promise envisages certain distinct practices to be followed by spiritual seekers. A seeker must maintain the firm and constant goal of realizing the self. Having fixed self-realization as the ultimate goal, he must strive to achieve that end, to gain union with self, to become one with God. He must oblate all his physical, mental, and intellectual activities to realizing the self, nothing else. To such seekers, Krishna promises yoga and kshema.
Okay, so I have a question. If you are pursuing things in the world with the idea to gain the self, possible? Is it possible?
It is possible because we all live in the world.
Okay, so if your focus is on all your acquisition for your enjoyment alone, is it possible?
It's possible, but temporarily.
Okay, so it's not possible to gain enlightenment, is it?
Yes.
So it's possible to gain a fix temporarily. Right. Good. So one who strives beyond their own interests, goes within, beyond even unselfish, it's focused on the self. That's the difference. Yeah. So you don't want anything out of it as such. Let's read the next.
The promise of yoga and the kshema presents different interpretations. The first one, the grant of yoga suggests gaining that which you do not possess, and kshema, preserving what you have gained. Second, those two words can cover both spiritual and material fields. Yoga referring to spiritual enlightenment and kshema to success in the material world. Though the verse serves either way, its direction for spiritual enlightenment overrides the material benefits. Third, yoga in the context can also mean stability in the spiritual pursuit, being firmly established in the path to self-realization, and kshema, the ultimate state of realization, but unswerving, though, and thoughts and constant effort towards the self and advance gradually in the spiritual path, you become more and more established in yoga, in the union with self. And by continuing in this determined course, you reach the supreme bliss of realization, kshema.
So my question is, how would if you are following the spiritual path, does it override the material benefit? What happens? How do we understand that? What he's saying there?
Is it when you're on the spiritual path and you're pursuing that, you are going more internal within? So you're not you're not entertaining the external as much in your thoughts and mindset.
Okay, and what happens? Why does it happen? What he's saying here. How does it happen?
Because it's the earlier verse is selfless. You're becoming more selfless, thinking of something beyond. So,
okay, what else?
And I think it's more about the detachment as well. You're detached from, although you are living and entertaining those material things, but you're not actually getting attached to it. So your focus is somewhere, higher. You know the distinction between that. So you don't divert from your goal, or from your spiritual path. At the same time, you're still doing your worldly activities. You're still engaging in them, but don't get sucked into that. You understand that's temporary. Your goal is, something else.
Okay, good. Good. Anybody else want to add to that? So as you pitch up within on the self, on that focus, you give yourself that elbow room, that capacity to be that sakshi, that objectivity, which makes you less interested because you've got your focus on something bigger in the mundane things. You understand the transient nature. So when you engage, you do so for the purpose you get out. You end the perception with perception. So it makes it attractive. You are made attractive, in effect, to the others. When you detach from the object of desire, you gain it. When you're attached to it, you lose it. When you're possessive about it, you lose it. So mentally detach and do your work. You get yoga and kshema. You get both the material, the spiritual. If you're not actually really interested in it. You get it and you use it to the best and you enjoy it, but you're not attached to it. That's not your focus. It's overridden. You've become less interested in the material, as it were, as well. This is a higher value in focus. Mundane's almost dropped. So when you need it, it'll come. You have to exercise that in life so you'll see the evidence of it. Let's go. Let's go. Mm. 23.
येऽप्यन्यदेवता भक्ताः यजन्ते श्रद्धयान्विताः तेऽपि मामेव कौन्तेय यजन्त्यविधिपूर्वकम् अहं हि
Sorry. Sam, if you could read the verse. Thank you.
Verse 23. Even those devotees who, endowed with Shraddha, faith, worship other gods, they also worship me alone, O Kanteya, though contrary to traditional practice.
So, Anyadeva Tabhakta. The other yogis, those who have devotion. So other than the yogis who are pursuing the self, they also, in a way, worshipping the self. So what they did is, because if your thoughts were not going towards the self and it was going towards the world, they planted gods everywhere on the world, because it's hard for us to fix our mind on that self, which we did not know, but we're constantly engaging in the world. So in which case, they fixed gods everywhere, gods plural. Gods meaning whatever you're doing, relate it to something higher. That's limited. So wherever you put in the effort, you will gain back that fix, that happiness. But the difference is, it's not an infinite happiness. It's a bits and pieces happiness, as Vijay was saying. You get something, but that's not really what you're after. And this is contrary to the tradition, but yet it was a way of getting people to focus on something bigger. So in Hinduism, that's what they devised, this idea of many gods. There's only one God, but there's many things we do in our lives. So if we can divinize that, it will eventually make us think about the higher, in a way, even if it's ritualistic and not going anywhere. Eventually it focuses on something higher. So even those ones who are, it's contrary to tradition, because the tradition is just to go for that infinite truth. Why would you settle for less? But even those who are worshipping gods, he's putting, they also worship me alone. So eventually you're going to come back, every one of us, to the self. That's our original nature. That's what we're after in everything we pursue. So everybody's seeking that peace and happiness in the world. Doesn't matter who you are. So Anya Deva, gods. So it gets confusing, all these gods in Hinduism, but there's only really one Brahman, as it were. And all of these have got symbolisms of Lakshmi, wealth. You worship wealth. Lakshmi, wealth, Saraswati. These are all secular to bring you back to something transcendental. So if you're running towards the world, this is one method to bring you towards thinking about something spiritual. So you, whatever the amount, you can focus on the truth, great. If it's 20%, 5%, the rest of it, whatever's focusing on the outside, you plant your mind, you pluck your mind from there and put it on there, the truth. But in the process, you're focusing your mind, divinizing every activity. So slowly, slowly, that 5% becomes 10%. You're focusing within. And it gradually gets more and more till you get to that infinite. It's a practice, as it were. So you're shifting from the headquarters of truth to the world, but then you're shifting from the world back to the truth within. Everything is divinized. Even the worst of situations, you divinize it. You could have a disease, you divinize it. It's all getting you back to the truth. That's the thinking. So you simply can't escape truth. This is if your mindset's that way. So if your mindset is that way, it's contrary to tradition, but it still will move you in that direction. Let's read it.
Spiritual seeking falls under two broad classifications: pursuing enlightenment or gaining limited goals short of enlightenment. Most seekers limit their pursuit to finite goals. Few seek enlightenment. In this verse, Krishna refers to finite pursuits as worshipping other gods. The Kshatras scriptures actually speak of one God known differently as the Supreme Self, Atman, Brahman. The gods and the goddesses of the Hindu pantheon merely represent the powers and functions of the unmanifest God in the manifest world. One worships God directly as Brahman or through the manifested representations and expressions referred to here as other gods.
So remember, if you worship one particular God, it's all gods, everything that you do. You know, sometimes we take an idol and we think, I worship a Krishna, or I worship a Vishnu, or I worship a Ganesh. It's nothing like that. These are just symbolic. So you've got to get off that. That's a very infant stage of worship. It's got to turn yourself inward to that truth. This is just to keep your mind focused, the punctuation to draw you inwards.
The human mind infested with desires running after the world seeking its fulfillment. It refuses to turn towards God. To circumvent this tendency of the mind, the ancient sages of India drew up an ingenious plan. They divinized practically everything in this world: wealth as goddess Lakshmi, knowledge as goddess Sarvati, creator as Brahma, sustainer as Vishnu, destroyer as Maheshvara, and so on. Consequently, the mind is reminded of the Supreme even as it pursues the desired objects of the world. These pursuits are mundane and limited, whereas the Kshatras lead you to self-realization. the goal of infinite peace and bliss. Hence, the worship of other gods is considered contrary to traditional practice.
Mhm. So if you're not a thinker, if you cannot think within, this is one method which helps you focus your mind. And it can focus, it brings attention or a consciousness to the totally spiritually illiterate person. You know, if you see an image of something bigger or an idol in front of you, or you have something auspicious, it raises you just even for that moment. So whatever you are engaged in, I always remember when I was little, it's not like this now, it's changed an awful lot. But in India, in every corner, you'd see in the corner of the building, on the street, just this red marks, it's people spitting. And they're spitting out the beetle leaf, the spit which comes from the beetle. It looks like sort of a rusty red, looks like blood even. Everywhere you see that splashed in the corners. It's so terrible. But what they began to do is put pictures of gods there. So somewhere in your consciousness, you can't spit there. So even at that mundane level, if something pricks in you, you can't do it. So it's slowly to everybody bringing the awareness, whether you do it from whatever your interest is in, your interest is in money, or your interest is in engineering, your interest in sport, whatever, you divinize it. Or where you are so illiterate that you can't divinize it, if it's focused there with idols, you pitch up something higher, you respect it. It's the starting point of something bigger within you. So a country like India, when you go there, sometimes you wonder where the divinity is, but then you start observing, and it's a powerhouse of spirituality. Even in the muck of it all, it's real, you just have to observe. So we're not talking about that particularly here, it's how you raise your consciousness from outside to in. That's the important thing. Let's go.
I just have a quick question, if I
Yeah.
may. The last bit, it says, hence the worship of other gods is considered contrary to traditional practice. What was traditional practice?
Traditional practice is only to get to the self. Selfless in the Upanishads, it doesn't even talk about karma, bhakti, jnana. It just talks about renunciation, selfless service, selfless, selfless, selfless. It doesn't even talk about it in some places. It says to you, if you can't be selfless, then do karma. It puts it that way. It doesn't even say karma yoga in the sense of, it just means if you can't be selfless, be unselfish. So contrary to tradition is when you're going outward. So we're pitching up gods outwardly. You're only going to get a temporary fix when you divinize that inner mind. But collectively, if you keep getting one thought, one thought, one thought, it brings a mass of thoughts, it brings a satsang, it brings a detachment from the pursuit, the goal, the expectation. It pitches your mind up on some higher values. Slowly, it's expected that your conscience pricks and you turn it inward. So it's contrary to tradition, because tradition doesn't deal with that even. It deals with, in the scriptures, just come on, let's get on to looking at the self. It means in the traditional sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Vedanta, not Hinduism. Hinduism is devised with it and come out of that. Tim.
You can divinize anything, so you have many gods, even though they point to the self. The other way around, is this partly why there are so many different names for the self, for Like last night in a class on Bhagavad, there was a question about why aren't they using the word Atman? So the reciprocal side of it is you can use many names to point to the self.
So all it is meaning is you use whatever it takes to take you inward. And throughout the texts, there's different ways of doing that. And a lot of what we make differences on are names and forms. What's the difference between one sage and another sage? We make those comparisons. As that one was a good one and that was not so good one. We war amongst it. But anybody who's evolved themselves to a certain status, and if you're following that, that's what you should be considering. How do I aspire for that? So there's lots of names and forms to get to the self. You may come and have a particular language and call God one name or another name. It's language. But once you understand it, you understand. The language of a smile is universal, has no words. So it obliterates all the names and forms. But if you need a name to fix yourself, to go and use it. That's what it says. So there are many, many names.
I suppose I'm suggesting the fluidity of names, like Dhananjaya is another name for Arjuna. You can have many names for a person. And is that to suggest that you should be looking towards the self and not be tied to one name, one identity?
Yes. And never be getting stuck. There's one truth backing all of those names and forms. That's all it's saying.
But it's the other side. By having many names, does that lead you to the self? It releases your fixation on one thing.
So the fixation is universal. So if you are inspired by one name or another, it will not matter. The backing of that is the same. So something universal or infinite is in every aspect of those divisions. So if it's Dhananjaya, or if it's Govindam, or if it's Archita, if it's Krishna, if it's Christ, if it's Muhammad, it really doesn't matter. If it's the tree that you see, if you see divinity, something backing it, you use that name to get you there, whatever you want to call it. It really doesn't matter. So yes, you can have as many names, but you've got to have that comprehension of that universality to get you there. Whatever suits you in your nature, let it take you to that universality. Don't get stuck with making the divisions. That's where the danger is. My God is Krishna or Vishnu. What about the other names? You become exclusive, then there's a problem. I'll kill you for my God. There's nothing universal in that. It's only divisive and finite. So it's what's backing all you've got to get a hold of. Use whatever name you want to take you there. If it's fluid, use it, it's fine. But it's got to get to that ultimate truth. 24.
सर्वयज्ञानां भोक्ता च प्रभुरेव च न तु मामभिजानन्ति तत्त्वेनातश्च वन्ति ते.
Tim, if you could read the verse. Thanks.
Verse 24. I am indeed the enjoyer and also the Lord of all yajnas, sacrifices, but they do not know me in reality, hence they fall.
So it's a little bit about what we were just talking about. the idea is the consciousness enlivens all actions and enjoyments, all acquisition and enjoyments. So one forgets when one's engaged in the enjoyments or acquisition what underlies it, that self. So you get tied up in your own acquisition, your own work, and you no longer have the inclination when things are going well to think of something bigger. So you don't posit the Atman or Brahman as the enjoyer, because our identification is on the matter layers, the body, mind, and intellect. You say, I am the enjoyer. My mind is the emotions are an enjoyer. My intellect is the idea is enjoyer. But you don't think of what that enjoyer, what that enlivener is, backing those activities, which enables them. You just become, I am the enjoyer. It cultivates that ego almost. So Katritva Bhavana and Bhoktritva Bhavana, that I am the doer, I'm all important. When you identify to satisfy your needs of the body, mind, intellect, that ego separates you and you forget that it's the Atman enabling that enjoyment. So you fall short when we forget that consciousness. It's like thinking, you know, there's many stories, but I'm trying to think of one in the sense that, you know, we forget, like even when the sun is, we forget because of the sun, the whole planet exists. But we might cultivate our little part and think that we did it. We have a nice garden, we grew it. Well, thinking without sun, you're nothing. So we should respect how to cultivate that environment. You know, we get fixated that I'm the only one. Right now, we forget because of electricity, because of the innovations of others, that we can actually have this class. So we focus on our own egos rather than the consciousness. But it's the consciousness which enables all. One has to start going inwards to recognize something bigger than one's own self-centeredness. Got to keep reminding yourself when you slip up. You know, in the spiritual path, it doesn't matter if you slip up, it doesn't matter if you make a mess, it doesn't matter if you exert your importance, but catch yourself doing that. And when you do so, remind yourself, it's only from your mistakes you learn anyway. Remind yourself to step up again. Let's read it.
Krishna declares himself, Atman, as the enjoyer and lord of all yajnas, sacrifices. The self assumes the state of enjoyership by virtue of being the perceiver in the sense organs, feeler in the mind, and thinker in the intellect. It becomes the experiencer enjoying the experiences through the media of the body, mind, and intellect. The self assumes the state of lordship, since it is the enlivening principle in all actions. Yajna means sacrifice, means actions. Without the self, there can be no action, no sacrifice, no yajna. All yajnas originate in the self. Hence, self is considered the lord of yajnas.
So you can do a yajna every day, all the time. When you're doing any activity, I'm not this body, mind, or intellect, I'm this self. Remind yourself, when it goes well, I'm not this body, mind, intellect. It's the self enabling the enjoyment. When it goes not so great, no, I'm not this body, mind, and don't get affected. Even when you get affected, remind yourself, I'm that self. There's something bigger. Move on. keep moving on. Let's have the last.
Those who fail to recognize the role of self, who do not realize the supreme self, fall into limitations of the mortal world. They go through the endless chain of birth and death.
Can you imagine the light bulb taking the credit for electricity? I glow bright because of electricity. Not because of electricity, because of my own doing. But we all know electricity backs it. Can you imagine if the electricity is not functioning right now? We can't have this class, but we assume that our laptops do everything. Can you imagine if your phone is taken away for a week? You see, it's what it can help us on is appreciating all that happens in the universe. And you're just part of it. And there's something backing that, enabling it all to happen. So we have to do our best to fit in. The Atman and Nebensoul. Let's start here. Right. If there's any questions, we have a few minutes, otherwise we'll start till next week. Right.